If you've ever played a Nintendo Switch before, chances are you've encountered an issue where Mario leaps off a skyscraper in New Donk City without your input. No, this isn't Mario succumbing to the pressures of continuously saving the Mushroom Kingdom, but rather something called Joy-Con drift. It may sound like a misguided crossover between Fast and Furious and Nintendo, but the actual reality is, believe it or not, even more horrifying.
Joy-Con drift is a widespread malfunction of its namesake controller. Basically, the control stick will register inputs that the user didn't make, causing all sorts of fun issues ranging from the mildly irritating to the wall-smashing frustrating. Besides being an issue that seems to affect more Switch users than not, all four of my Joy-Con have experienced various levels of drift throughout the years. Another reason this has become an especially potent issue amongst Nintendo fans is because of the company's long-held standards for hardware quality. I mean, this is coming from a company that has such a ridiculously high standard of quality that we made up a word for the material Nintendo made their consoles out of. So you may have glanced at the title and thought that it was a little bit hyperbolic. How could a hardware malfunction undermine the legacy of an entire company? I mean, Nintendo survived the Virtual Boy, which was basically a hardware malfunction in the form of a console. Before we get into the discussion about Joy-Con drift, we first need to do a little digging into the history of Nintendo. It's the summer of 1983. Over in the United States, McDonald's is introducing the McNugget and claims it's made out of chicken, and E.T. almost single-handedly destroys the North American video game market. In Japan, Nintendo plans to step away from making arcade games and get into the home console business. The release of the Famicom has been met with relative success. The consoles are selling a bit better than expected, and Nintendo's transition into this new market seems like it's working. But only several months after the console's domestic launch, something happens. Reports of Famicom suddenly crashing or freezing during gameplay. The issue is eventually tracked down to a faulty motherboard. In the months leading up to the holiday season, President of Nintendo Hiroshi Yamauchi makes a potentially disastrous decision. He is gonna recall the Famicom. Not just the ones with the faulty motherboard, but every single fucking Famicom. Nintendo would replace them with a functioning circuit and release them back to the market.
I just want to emphasize how big of a deal this was. Product recalls have the potential to significantly damage or even destroy a company. Peanut Corp of America went under after a product recall due to a salmonella outbreak, and well, they probably should have. In 1994, Intel came under fire after customers reported that their new Pentium chips were malfunctioning. Rather than replace the chips, no questions asked, Intel demanded that customers show that the chip was faulty. Despite the fact that Intel estimated that a small percentage of chips were affected by the malfunction, their public reputation still took a significant hit.
Basically, the recall was enough to, if done improperly, destroy Nintendo as a company, at least in the home console market. In that space, they were still new, untested. At this point, Super Mario Bros. Hadn't even come out yet. Popeye was one of the best known games on the console. Consumers could have seen this new product with a widespread fault and dismissed the company entirely. Instead, something else happened. Retailers, tired of dealing with the blame for other companies' faulty products, really appreciated Nintendo's willingness to own up to their mistakes. Consumers felt taken care of, with Nintendo replacing their console no questions asked. The Famicom recall ended up costing Nintendo millions of dollars, but ultimately saved the company. It may have not been apparent at the time, but this was the beginnings of a solid reputation Nintendo had for quality and customer service that would go on to last for decades, until, well, you know. The Famicom recall was far from the last time Nintendo made a drastic move in the name of quality and customer service. Some of you remember these things. This is a sign for a Nintendo Authorized Repair Center, which Nintendo set up in the late 80s to serve as an alternative to sending in your console directly to the company. They were pretty widespread in their heyday and were set up in already existing mom-pop electronics stores. Nintendo would send out manuals, test cartridges, and replacement parts and equipment to these repair centers. If you were in North America, there was a decent chance that there would be an authorized repair center nearby to handle your hardware issues. I even remember taking my Super Nintendo to one back in the 90s. I made a whole video about that back when I thought wearing this TV on my head was a good idea. Check it out if you're interested in learning more about these things. These centers didn't exist to make a profit. In fact, it seems like at best, Nintendo was breaking even on these repair centers. They were about setting an image, an idea, in the consumer's head. If you bought a Nintendo product, you could trust that the company was going to look out for you if anything went wrong. If you crack open an instruction manual from anything pre-Wii, chances are you'll find this little Mario with a screwdriver, which sends this subliminal message that makes you feel secure in your choice to play Nintendo games. Like I mentioned earlier, Nintendo's reputation for quality products even spurred a name, Nintendium. Type that into Google and you'll find hundreds of examples of Nintendo products surviving the craziest of circumstances and coming out on the other side still functional. This was the image Nintendo cultivated, a company that created a quality product, and if anything went wrong, they would have your back.
Problems with Joy-Con controllers started before the Switch's official launch. Reports from reviewers who got the console early claimed there were connection issues between the console and the left Joy-Con. Eventually, it was revealed that the issue was caused by a manufacturing variant on several early production Joy-Con. It would be fixed in all future consoles, and Nintendo would repair the affected controllers free of charge. Or if you like me, you just don't repair anything and generally stay unhappy and frustrated, because that's better than going without playing your Switch for 2 weeks and being forced to be alone with your thoughts and recognize your failings as a person. While this isn't the same thing as Joy-Con drift, I think it sets the stage. Before the console was even launched, people were primed to think something may go wrong with their Joy-Con, and Nintendo knew it.
The Joy-Con drift issues started fairly early on in the Switch's lifespan, and by 2018 it was already known as an issue that was more than a simple outlier. People claimed that nearly all of their Joy-Con controllers would experience drift after a while, and expressed frustration at both the Joy-Con's high price and out-of-warranty repair cost. Interestingly, for at least the first year or so, there was actually a debate about whether or not Joy-Con drift even existed, with some even claiming that it isn't an issue to this day, including Nintendo themselves, but we'll get back to that in a bit. But I just want to point out that this isn't a simple case of Nintendo fanboys simping. Look, all gaming companies have fanboys who are willing to go to bat for a company no matter how they're behaving. But with this specific situation, I feel like it's a little different. Remember, Nintendo purposely created an image that they were a reliable company. For some people, that marketing was so effective that it was simply easier to believe that people were exaggerating the issue rather than Nintendo creating a faulty product. So, what exactly is happening to the Joy-Cons and causing the drifting issues? Well, the answer isn't that simple. There are generally two explanations given for the cause. 1. Debris and dust getting caught underneath the rubber cap of the thumbstick, or contacts inside the controller getting worn down after prolonged use of the joystick. Now, while those are the two most popular theories, as of the recording of this video, there isn't any concrete explanation for Joy-Con drift. An expert involved with one of the lawsuits against Nintendo, yeah, there are multiple lawsuits Nintendo is facing because of Joy-Con drift, but more on that in a bit, offers up this explanation. As the steel brushes inside of the joystick move back and forth, they rub away the soft carbon material that makes up the pad, which changes its electrical resistance and leads to the drifting phenomenon. The difference in surface hardness between the steel brush and the carbon pad results in excessive wear debris that collects in the steel brush tips. The wear on the carbon, a known soft material, by the steel brushes, a known hard material, inevitably causes the joysticks to fail. There are some compelling theories for why it's happening that differ from these, and some that claim it's a combination of several of these factors.
So, how could you go about repairing the issue? The simplest solution was to send your faulty Joy-Con to Nintendo. But the problem was that Nintendo's warranty only covered 90 days after the initial purchase for accessories and a year for consoles, which included the Joy-Cons that came with your console. The problem comes from the fact that for most people, issues with Joy-Con drift only seem to happen 6 to 12 months after purchase. Out-of-warranty repairs costed around $40, which was nearly what a brand new Joy-Con goes for. Seriously, Nintendo, these things are way too expensive.
Fan outrage quickly spread across the internet, with Nintendo being evasive and not directly responding to customer and press requests for a statement about Joy-Con drift. Inquiries were generally met with a vague statement directing consumers to visit Nintendo's support site, which offered no real help beyond a suggestion to update your Switch and recalibrate your Joy-Con. Glancing at various internet forums, you could also find tales of dejected Switch owners who sent their Joy-Con in for repairs only to have them start to drift again several months later. Because of that, home remedies for Joy-Con drift started to become increasingly popular, ranging from simple things like spraying some canned air underneath the thumbsticks to full-on replacements for certain parts of the controller. These became so popular that you can easily find an entire Joy-Con repair kit on Amazon. I'll get around to using this one day, I swear. However, things really came to a head in July 2019 when a class action lawsuit was filed in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. The lawsuit was filed by Ryan Diaz, who claimed he sent in his Joy-Con for repair under his 1-year warranty, but ended up having the same drifting issue only a few months later. Out of warranty, Diaz would now have to pay for a repair with no real guarantee that the issue would go away. Instead, he opted to purchase a new pair of Joy-Con for $90. Diaz's suit argued that Nintendo knew that Joy-Con drift was an issue and that there was some kind of widespread defect with the controller, but refused to acknowledge it to the public. Nintendo's lawyers had hoped the case would be dismissed, but the courts refused. While many claim that the issues of Joy-Con drift were overblown and Nintendo had done nothing wrong by not acknowledging them publicly, Diaz's claim would soon become validated. Only 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, an internal Nintendo customer service memo was leaked to Vice News, which revealed that customers would no longer have to pay for repair on any Joy-Con. Yeah, not a great look, Nintendo. The memo read, "Customers will no longer be requested to provide proof of purchase for Joy-Con repairs. Additionally, it is not necessary to confirm warranty status. If a customer requests a refund for a previously paid Joy-Con repair, confirm to the prior repair and then issue the refund." This leak was damning to Nintendo, especially because at the time, their public statements still deflected the issue. But this memo proved that Nintendo knew Joy-Con drift was a problem and widespread enough that they were willing to do the repairs for free even when the controllers were out of warranty. Problems continued in September of 2019 when the Switch Lite was released. Users began to report Joy-Con drift problems with the new system, which proved to be an even larger frustration as the controllers were part of the console itself, and sending it off to Nintendo for repairs requires you to send your entire console. Diaz's class action lawsuit was amended in September to include the Switch Lite. Frustrations with Joy-Con drift only grew from here, with no viable solution being offered and brand new consoles and controllers purchased in 2020 continued to have the issue. In June of 2020, President of Nintendo Shuntaro Furukawa made an official apology for Joy-Con drift during an investors meeting. "We apologize for any inconvenience caused to our customers regarding Joy-Con controllers. We are continuing to improve our products, but currently Joy-Con is subject to a class action lawsuit in the United States and is a pending issue, so we cannot comment on any specific actions we may take."
I understand Nintendo needs to appease the people who own stock in the company, but does it bother anyone else that Nintendo made this apology to their investors and not to the general public who consume their games? Remember, these investors are the same ones who question why Nintendo is even in the video game industry. Something tells me they're not concerned about Joy-Con drift because they're doing a speedrun of Breath of the Wild.
While an official recognition of the problem was vindicating for many, things only got worse for Nintendo in the following months. Another lawsuit was filed on October 5th, 2020, and only a month later, a third one was filed. And Nintendo's legal issues weren't exclusive to the United States. Back in May of 2019, a French consumer advocacy group filed a complaint against Nintendo, alleging that Nintendo is engaging in practices of planned obsolescence, basically claiming that Nintendo was trying to purposely shorten the lifespan of the Switch and its controllers.
Which is a bit silly. It's not like Nintendo would ever arbitrarily limit the release of a product that could bring them money. What the f?
In January 2021, a lawsuit was filed against Nintendo in Canada by a law firm in Quebec, claiming that the continued sale of Joy-Con with a known defect violates the province's Consumer Protection Act. And a wider European advocacy group began asking all European Switch owners to report issues with Joy-Con drift to determine if any further action should be taken. So while all this may seem pretty bad for Nintendo, they actually do have an ace up their sleeve, in a way. Nintendo's end user license agreement, which all Switch users must agree to in order to set up their console, contains a provision that says all users who agree, quote, waive their right to file a class action suit or seek relief on a class basis, and that all disputes will be finally settled by binding arbitration, meaning that there could be no further action taken after the arbiter has made their decision. Now, although you have to agree to the EULA during the Switch's setup, you can opt out of it by sending a physical written notice within the first 30 days after purchase. Come on, Nintendo. None of the plaintiffs in the United States' class action lawsuits chose to do so. Historically, Nintendo has avoided settlements and jury trials due to their EULA, and in all likelihood, that'll remain true in these cases. 4 years into the Switch's lifespan, its controllers are still facing potentially game-breaking issues. Nintendo has 5 or so lawsuits facing them, and larger issues about anti-consumer behavior loom over them beyond Joy-Con drift.
This is a tale of two companies. Nintendo's reputation for dependable hardware and consumer goodwill has surely taken a hit in recent years, and depending on how this Joy-Con drift situation plays out in the future, may erode altogether. Now, don't get me wrong, this is far from enough to destroy Nintendo as a company, but I believe there will be a before drift and an after drift when it comes to Nintendo's hardware reputation. The company that once recalled all Famicoms in order to gain the trust of consumers now continues to sell a product they know is defective, and that'll stick in people's minds for years to come.